the end of your presentation, you touched on two topics that came up a lot in the questions. So Ben, if Ben is still here, Ben asked a couple questions around access. How can SQL be leveraged in new? Oh, sorry, that was a different one. At a company, there may be many tables that live in different databases that different teams own. How do you navigate access, gaining access? And then, how do you see what tables you have access to? If you are using tables that you don't own in your own organization, how do you validate whether the data is good? And then how do you go about getting access? So, Ben, was your question answered at the end of the presentation? You can give me a thumbs up or raise your hand or unmute to say yes or no.
Um, I think partially, but that the first question was not, I would say, the one about being able to navigate getting access to tables in multiple places, and then you might like run into some barriers or boundaries in terms of certain teams not giving you access to those things.
Yeah, for sure. So every engineer or data scientist that has access to the tables gets it in some way. So there's some kind of portal and request system, and part of it is just figuring out what is that system so you can access it. If they're kind of gatekeeping it, that is more of like a cultural issue that, this is where I was saying sometimes you can get access to that, and sometimes it's a matter of making a case to leadership and trying to like drive consensus between the teams. You can help to show exactly how you'd use the data, what value the company would get out of it. But there are times you will get stuck there. So it's one of those things where you can do your best, but you may not always succeed. But I think one thing that can help is to just illustrate exactly how you want to use the data, and what value the team will get from it. So giving them, again, more context, I think will help you make the case for that. But yeah, sometimes it's that really squishy political thing of trying to figure out how you get leaders aligned. So a lot of
Yeah,
SQL issues like that are not code problems, for better or for worse.
sure. And then one quick follow-up on that, Carl. Like, is there, is there a way that within SQL you're able to see like just a list of tables of everything that you do have access to at your company?
Yeah, so this is where SQL is like the syntax itself, but a lot of it sits within like a bigger suite of tools. Like one example would be like BigQuery, which is Google's. And that tends to have more of a database of what tables are available. They often have previews of the variables that are available. You often can't see that for tables you don't have access to. But there might also be entirely separate portals where you can kind of
Mm,
search for what tables exist and then maybe request access there, because data scientists have these same problems too. They don't know all the tables. So that's not so much a SQL thing, but it's all the tooling that exists around SQL.
got it. Thank you. Appreciate it, Carl.
Yep.
Thanks, Ben. You also touched on AI, and there were several questions from Shima and others around AI about more and more database tools offer AI-enabled natural language querying, where anyone in the organization can ask a question in natural language and get the appropriate data in tables and visualizations. So Shima was asking, what are your thoughts around how much UX researchers should invest in learning SQL, or would a preliminary knowledge be enough versus a more expert approach?
Yeah, it depends on how deep you want to go. If you really just want to ask questions as simple as how many users are in X country, you might be able to get away with that now with these other tools. Like I said, I think we're still in the stage of vetting out how good these tools actually are, because I think they're pretty different. They're also changing really rapidly. So you would probably have to do that on a case by case basis. Maybe your first company has one that works well, and then you're in a new one and their tool is terrible. So then you might need to learn it anyway. So if you're really at that top layer of just asking like simple kind of aggregation questions, you could probably get away with that. But if you want to more deeply like understand the metrics for themselves, interrogate them, be able to push back on why we have the metrics in the first place, or do anything more advanced than simple aggregation, probably worth investing a little bit of time into SQL.
Awesome. That leads us into another series of questions where folks were asking, do hiring managers care about these kinds of things? Is there a cert that you can get or a program that you should take that folks are looking for when they're looking at UX researchers with data analysis skills? Can you answer that, or do you have a feeling for it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a hiring manager. I've done a number of like interviews in my career. I think it probably depends on the team and what they're looking for. And everything right now in the job market is about finding that right fit and being like the right candidate. I don't think certs are worth that much, just because there's not really like a standardization for them or a real strong governance for them. But if you're able to show some kind of projects where you've done it successfully, even if like there's actually a lot of available like public data sets, it's kind of hard to find ones that are like super UXy, but if you dig, I think you could. So you could do kind of a side project on your own. And it's actually much easier to do a SQL side project because you don't need to pay for participants or pay for, survey respondents. So it's actually pretty feasible to do a decent side project on your own. So you could show your skills in that way. The best way to do it is, of course, if you already have a role, to try and explore what you can do right now. So ultimately, I think if it works for the role, depends on what they're looking for. I know that I really like when my coworkers know SQL, we can communicate a little bit more easily around some things with recruitment and things like that at the
Yeah,
very least.
awesome. Following on to that, see if you can elaborate a little bit more. A lot of folks were curious about like the actual practicals of practicing SQL. Is there a tool? Are there public databases? Like, how could you do this side project with what materials and what tools?
Yeah, I would have to look it up. I think it's called Kaggle. Kaggle has a bunch of public data sets, and there are numerous like local environments. They're just like local programs you could download to your laptop, and you could start to query in that way. So that is a good way to do it if you want to get more exploratory. I think any of those tutorials that are linked out from what I'll share at the end there to get the basic syntax, but then getting into some real data will be helpful because it's going to be a lot messier, and you're going to have to like do a little bit more of like finding where the data is and things like that. So it is definitely feasible to do your own side project because you can do it all for free essentially compared to a lot of other UX research methods. So yeah, find some data that looks interesting, and you'd be motivated to explore a research question and try and come up with the answer around that.
Awesome. Along those lines, have you ever used SQL with data from Google Analytics to map out user journeys? It's a very
Um,
specific question.
Yeah, I don't use Google Analytics. I have it running on my website, but I just check the top line numbers. I think the experiences that I've had around SQL are probably even more granular than Google Analytics. And Google Analytics is probably pulling from tables that you would just query with SQL. Like, I think it's probably more of a wrapper, Google Analytics, like on top of SQL, that does analysis on data that is queried through the SQL language. So you could definitely do that. I haven't done it using that particular technical stack.
Awesome. Um, can you name any resources for implementing SQL in an enterprise environment? For example, is there an industry standard IDE like RStudio for R?
Yeah, it probably comes with whatever environment it has. So like I've used BigQuery in the past, and that just has like its own IDE within it. Meta has something they call Daiquiri, like DaiQuery, and that's what I use there. It's probably going to be bespoke for your organization. This is where like data science has to skill up their people as they come in because they have a different tooling stack than they did at their previous company, and those should be available. So find what they use for those like initial DS onboarding trainings, and that should be able to help you skill up for whatever your organization uses, because it's going to be some really specific, concoction of tools, and it's going to vary from place to place. So there isn't like a single standard like RStudio.
Okay. Along the lines of R, Susie asks, as an R user, what do you think is the hardest thing for an R user learning SQL to get their head around? And someone said they have that question in reverse. What's the hardest thing for a SQL user when learning R?
Okay, I'll do the first one. One is that they don't have RStudio because it's the best. But the other thing is that you kind of need to do one thing at a time with SQL. Like you kind of need to think of, okay, I'm going to transform this table in this way and get a table back. And then I'm going to make another subquery to do a next transformation. With R, you can kind of stack things all together a lot more fluidly, and it means a lot less code. And when you use things like the tidyverse, it's just a lot more intuitive. Like if you do a left join in R with the tidyverse, it will just know what you want to join by. It'll say, oh, you have two user ID columns. You don't need to tell me user ID. it just knows they're the same thing. In SQL, you had to be a lot more explicit. So it's like a little, I won't say dumber, it's just more explicit, and R, it, makes some educated guesses for you. The other way around, I think I'd have a hard time answering because I learned R much earlier than I learned SQL. So I haven't really experienced the SQL to R transition. I think with R, the challenge might be that you get a lot more kind of data structures like that you'll run into early on. You'll have things like lists and model objects, and it's not just like you get a table back. It could be a totally different thing than a table that has like subtables within it. So that could be a challenge you might run into early on.
Awesome. So Kathy had a question about QA and asked, what's your process for QA or bug checking SQL code? If your SQL program throws you an error message, how do you figure out where to correct it?
Yeah, QA, I mean, the language is fairly straightforward, so I run into it a lot less than R, where I'm just getting an error message thrown. A lot of QA for me comes when I get the data back. I'll do things like I'll summarize by different groups to see if like they're roughly the same number, or I'll look up like how many different kinds of strings I have. If I'm expecting 5 different countries and I only get 3 back, or I get 7 back, that'll inform me. So I less often just have an error. It's mostly like formatting, like the where is in behind the group by instead of in front of it. And a lot of the IDEs are pretty good at telling you that. More of it is things that I have to take on myself to say, like, does this data look like, does it look right in aggregate? So that's where I do more of the QA work with SQL.
Awesome. So from a more theoretical perspective, a little bit higher picture, Shreya wants to know, how do you think SQL can be leveraged in new product development?
Um, I mean, I think the big thing for new product development, I mean, I guess new product development, if you don't have any users yet, it probably won't be that helpful. If you have some new users, it'll probably be helpful because you may not have enough to be surveying or interviewing yet. So it can give you a look into their behaviors when you don't have the volume to be using more traditional user research methods. So it's something you can use earlier on. It's kind of like non invasive in the sense that you don't exhaust your pool of users for like interviews or invites for surveys. So if you don't have any users yet, it's not super useful. I'm sure someone can make a case for it, but nothing's coming to mind for me. But the other way is that you can use it instantly. There's no recruit time, there's no resources needed for it if you have people using your product.
Awesome. So there were a couple of folks who had really specific questions to each slide or to slides in your presentation. I'm going to encourage them to wait until they have the deck and the recording to reach out to you specifically. I think we'll get a little bit in the weeds if we try to answer those. So I just have a couple more that were very general and some notes. Jeanette said that they love the note about keep notes. They said, I often have to start and stop work, and keeping notes helps me having to redo the work because I forgot what I was trying to do before. So thank you for calling that out. Tamara said, I've learned more about SQL in the last few minutes than I have in the 3 courses that I've taken. So thank you. That was amazing. And then Michael asked, they said, I love the photos in this deck. Where did they come from?
The photos are all from Gemini. So I am not a huge user of AI for art, but if I just need some quick clip art for my slides, I find it does quite a good job there. And I've developed a prompt that I like. So yeah, they're all AI.
Awesome. Cool. Well, Carl, thank you so much. We will send you the transcript so that you can see all the comments too. Everybody's just appreciative, and there's a couple more questions. We'll encourage folks to follow up directly with Carl if you have questions. He says he's open to connections and open to follow up. And hopefully we'll have you back for another session because it seems like SQL and quant methods are pretty desired around here.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks everybody for joining and for the great questions.
Thanks for staying over. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks.